Hello, I am Cheyenne Ogle, and I am a Lakota from Wood Mountain Lakota First Nations. There are a lot of people who call Saskatchewan home. First Nation peoples have been here since time immemorial. Some have moved here very recently. One thing everyone learns quickly is how to survive this weather. Bundle up for the cold, keep cool in the shade. Long, cold, dark winters, short, hot summers. Many people in the world would say no thanks to our extreme climate. Prairie people like to talk about the weather. We complain about the cold, but then say it is a dry cold, which makes it easier somehow. The wind is a big topic, and there's a saying that the wind blows so hard that people almost fall over when it stops. The funny thing is that it's true. There may be years of drought, and then flooding can be a problem. Our extreme climate is probably one of the reasons why Saskatchewan people are known for their friendliness. Neighbors helping neighbors or complete strangers. There's a strong community spirit. We also belong to another community that's filled with prairie spirit. This is our home place, the big sky painted with spectacular sunsets or dotted with hundreds of geese, the rolling landscape and deep coulees. Our home place includes all the native plants and animals that have lived here for thousands of years. They have had to deal with cold winters, strong winds, and drought, just like we do. 12,000 years ago, the great ice sheets that had covered most of Saskatchewan melted and the climate became drier. With not enough water for trees, grasses grew with leaves that bend with the wind. In drought or winter, the grasses die back. The dried parts act like a blanket on the ground, protecting the living buds. Bison prospered, and soon millions of them thundered across the grasslands, grazing and then moving on. They were adapted to prairie living, with great shaggy coats to keep them warm in the winter and flat teeth to grind native grasses year-round. The prairie was alive with diversity of life. Numerous First Nation cultures, mule deer and pronghorn antelope, along with the plains grizzly bears and prairie wolves, roamed the prairie. But it was the bison that brought First Nations people onto the prairie. After horses arrived on the prairie with European colonizers and their guns, hunting bison remained hard, dangerous work and needed all the people working together. The bison provided food, thick hides for shelter, shoes and bedding, bones for tools, hair for ropes, toys for kids, and dried dung for fueling fires in a treeless land. No part of the bison was ever wasted. First Nation cultures on the prairie followed the herds onto the plains in the summer and into the parklands and valleys during the harsh winter. Gathering plants, berries, and medicines also helped First Nation cultures to thrive on the prairies. The bison is greatly respected in First Nation cultures and still plays an important role in sacred ceremonies, stories, and traditions. The land, water, plants, and animals are all respected in First Nation worldviews. Our ancestors knew that their lives depended on their relationship with nature and that they were a part of nature, not apart from it. Stories, ceremonies, and personal spiritual journeys connect First Nations peoples to the prairie and remind us to honor what gives us life. Water, grass, bison, and people are all a part of the circle of life. The more you look at the prairie, the more life you see. There are dozens of native grass species. If you knew what to look for, you would see that each looks different. Some are short, others tall. The leaves have different shapes and colors. Many grasses grow and flower at different times, so the prairie is always changing. It's not just grasses that are adapted to prairie life. The flowers of the western spiderwort bloom for just a day as they hug the southern sand dunes. Two kinds of roots, slender and thick, help conserve moisture in the shifting sands. Buds, formed in the fall, quickly produce new plants in the spring when it's wetter. You usually only see moths at night, but Vernus flower moth is a buzzing daytime flyer. It lives where prairie grasses are sparse and grazed, which is the right habitat for pussy toes, its only food plant to grow. Vernus flower moth spends most of its life as a pupa at or below ground. The adult moths emerge from the pupae in the spring and only live for 1 to 2 weeks. Single eggs are deposited into the flower heads of the pussy toes. Once the eggs hatch, there's only about 3 weeks for the caterpillar to grow before turning into the pupae for the rest of the year. That's one way to beat drought and cold. You wouldn't expect to find an amphibian in dry open grasslands, but the Great Plains toad is adapted to this habitat. Days are spent hiding in the shade, nights are for hunting insects and spiders. When it's too dry or cold, this toad heads underground. They back into soft ground, shuffling their bodies and kicking out soil. In the winter, the Great Plains toad must burrow below the frost line if it is to survive. Across open southern prairie where grasses are sparse and short, a swift fox can run like the wind. Speeds of over 50 kilometers per hour sometimes helps the swift fox catch a jackrabbit, although most of the time this night hunter feeds on grasshoppers, mice, or dead animals. It uses dens on slopes and hilltops all year round for protection from the weather and predators. When you are a cat-sized fox living sparse grasslands, you need to hide from hawks and eagles. Owls nest in trees, but on the treeless prairie, the little burrowing owl heads underground for protection. Foxes, badgers, and ground squirrels do the hard work of digging burrows for themselves, but when they move out, the burrowing owl moves in, especially when there is a nice open view of open grassland with patches of short and tall plants. There they can run on their skinny long legs, hunting grasshoppers and beetles by day and mice by night. Burrowing owls escape the winter by flying south. In the late 1800s, policy allowed tens of millions of bison to be killed by hide hunters, European colonizers, and those who killed just for fun, to the point that bison almost went extinct. There was little food for First Nations people, and we had to adapt to this change by signing treaties allowing European colonizers to set up farms, cities, and ranches on the prairies. The native prairie was broken and agriculture took over. It was easy to plow up the native prairie grasses and grow large crops of grain in the fertile soil. The prairies became known as the breadbasket of the world. European colonizers worked very hard to make a living and to develop communities. Many came from lands with gentle climates and different cultures, so it was a shock to settle in the land of living skies and open space. Nowadays, Saskatchewan is booming. Thanks to treaties signed a long time ago between First Nations peoples and the Government of Canada, we are a resource-rich province and our cities are growing larger and need more space. Farms and ranches are getting bigger and more efficient at producing food. First Nation cultures and traditions are alive and well in Saskatchewan, and we are participating in this economic boom. People from all over the world are coming to live in Saskatchewan. Despite where we come from, the prairie affects us. We all look up when we hear the geese returning in the spring. We grumble about the weather, too hot, too cold, too dry, too wet, but the prairie is our home place and makes us who we are. That means we have a relationship with the native plants and animals who also call the prairie their home place. But not much native prairie has survived. Only about 20% of native prairie is left in Saskatchewan now, and we keep losing more. Most bison are now kept as livestock. The swift fox and burrowing owl are endangered in Saskatchewan. The western spiderwort and Vernus flower moth are threatened, and the Great Plains toad is of special concern. More and more species are at risk. We are losing the diversity of native prairie life. When native prairie is lost to agriculture, urban expansion, or road development, it's easy to see. What's harder to see is what's happening to some of the native prairie that's left. That's because it's a green invasion of non-native plants. These weeds can grow and reproduce so quickly that they take over native prairie and upset the balance of nature. This is a pretty plant. It blooms from spring to fall with cheery daisy-like flowers, but don't let appearances fool you. Scentless chamomile is a superweed from Europe. All those flowers produce seeds that quickly sprout and grow into new plants. Seedlings in the fall will overwinter and then burst into flower in early spring. One plant can cover a square meter and produce up to 1 million seeds. It's adapted too quickly to take over places where the soil is exposed. Leafy spurge is another bright-colored invasive alien plant species. It has a characteristic milky sap inside. This European plant grows rapidly from seeds and by sending up shoots from its large creeping root system. It's really hard to get rid of. Canada thistle is not Canadian. It comes from Europe. Lots of people have been poked by this plant's sharp, spiny leaves through their socks. This weed forms a dense colony, aggressively displacing native plants in overgrazed or disturbed areas. Along stream banks and wetlands, the thistle takes the place of native plants that wildlife need for food or that ducks need for nesting cover. The diversity of life on native prairie helps keep our home place of Saskatchewan healthy. Native Prairie is home to plants that are adapted to our extreme climate. The plants provide habitat that prairie animals need to survive. The land, plants, and animals fit together and work as a unit, providing us with healthy water and soil resources. It's a part of the circle of life. The diversity of life of Native Prairie is also a source of beauty and inspiration. It provides us with lessons from nature that help us understand our relationship to the natural world. We are a part of the prairie, not just living on the prairie. That means we have a personal responsibility to our home place to keep it healthy. Our everyday actions have an impact. Everyone can make a difference. Reducing our consumption of energy, water, and goods, reducing our waste, and caring for our native prairie resources are beneficial practices that connect us to each other and to the environment. It makes the world a better place.